I just didn't know.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to come in and we'll get started. Thanks. Okay, good evening. We're going to start with a presentation we've put together. It'll go over our new funding formula and overall of the budget, questions we've received ahead of time, and then we'll open it up for questions after that. Okay. Oh. I don't know how do I get that out? Okay. Okay. So just an overall overview of the district. We have 26 schools, including 4 rural schools spread across about 17,100 square miles, making us the second largest geographical school district in the 48 states. Each year, the district serves between 9,500 to 10,000 students and employs about 1,200 people. So an overview of our changes in funding. We used to be under the Nevada Plan DSA funding. Now we're under the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan, which started this year. 2000 FY22 base funding per pupil was $9,279. In 23, it's expected to be $9,267. So that's pretty close to the same, but that means that step increases, inflation, and COLAs are not funded under this plan. This was implemented by the state to add $275 million to Nevada school districts in FY23 alone compared to FY20. The highest increase is seen by Clark County School District with an increase of $197.4 million in FY23. We have an expected decrease in FY23 of $622,000 per NDE. FY22 decrease is expected to be about $3.3 million due to the mandatory return of about $4.1 million in net proceeds of mines FY21 revenue received in FY22. So big changes for the Elko County School District. Local source revenues under the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan flow through the Nevada State Education Fund now. So that includes the state mandated 75-cent ad valorem tax, local government support tax, and school support tax. Any local rates in addition to that NRS mandated ad valorem rate would stay local because that would have a designated purpose. The way weighted funding works, if a student is in at-risk, gifted and talented, or English learner or special ed, they are not counted in the base funding. And another big change is categorical grants. About 20 grants that used to be funded separately are now funded in this base number. The biggest one is class size reduction. So that's the reason for the transfer from the general fund to the state grants fund, because that's where they've all been accounted for. It's just no longer funded in the state grants fund. Transportation. So that used to be funded on a rolling 4-year average. So the way we're funded under Hold Harmless now is we're funded based on FY20. Well, we didn't buy any buses in FY20, so that means we're not funded for buses. So that would have to come out of our base funding. We've got an aging fleet. We receive buses from other districts after they're deemed too old. We run them a few more years. Parts are getting hard to find and more expensive as they get older. So we're looking at renewing our fleet. So there's a big amount in our transportation budget. So I wanted to break out what that was for. So Northside needs a truck and a plow, $42,000. Mountain View needs a plow, $6,600. Owyhee needs a truck, $35,000. Suburbans, $65,000. If we budget for 5 buses a year, that would replace them every 16 years if we cycled through. So that's how we got the $1,150,000 in transportation budget. So that'll have to be flexible depending on our funding. You know, if one year we need to buy 2 buses instead of 5, it'll be flexible. So I broke out the tentative budget for the general fund by object. So 81% of the budget is salaries, wages, and benefits, including health insurance premiums the district pays for all eligible employees. 3% of the salaries, wages, and benefits is for central services. Supplies makes up about 11%. For a total of $105 million. So when you look at the wages lines on the budget, you can't really compare just to the agreements. So, okay, the agreements negotiated are for a 2% COLA. So those lines won't increase just 2% because people have step increases as well. So the yearly increases are higher. Another big item we have this year is the math curriculum to replace for all the grades. That could be $2 million. So not an expense that happens every year. Chromebook ratios. The grants during COVID helped us get up to a 1-to-1 ratio for Chromebooks for students. That'd be 1.3 million to keep that going. We also have requirements for ending fund balance. So the maximum set by the state under this pupil-centered funding plan is 16.6%. Anything higher of all the eligible funds added together, anything higher than 16.6% of budgeted expenditures gets swept to the state's education fund. Board policy says an ideal ending fund balance is about 8.3%. The minimum per NRS is 4. If it goes below that, we need to submit a plan to the state of how we'll increase it. The tentative budget that we presented in April had an ending fund balance of 10.11%. The draft as of now is down to 5.3%. So we'll be working on that. But that's due to our FY20 revenues decreasing by the 4.1 million of net proceeds in mines that's being deducted out of our revenue for the rest of this year. We added the 1.3 million for the Chromebook ratio. We added a transfer to other special funds of 250,000. So what this is meant for is if we get a donation, we match that donation. So it helps our donations go farther. It helps incentivize donations. And it's just so it doubles the money and they can do a bigger project with that donation. And then, so we got E-rate projects approved. We allocated 300,000 to that because the grants will pay 70% of those projects, improving internet, adding fiber, updating the old radio towers that are due for an update. The grants will pay 70% of that. How the supplies budgets are allocated to schools. So what we do is we get a student count and a teacher count for all the schools. And that's how we allocate a certain amount per student and per teacher to all the schools. So this is just for supplies and services. This is not for utilities or rental of Xerox or postage machines. That comes out of a central budget. Each school receives a Part A budget and a Part B budget. The Part A is instructional and support services and supplies, and Part B is for facilities maintenance. Capital improvement. Capital projects are not funded under the pupil-centered funding plan, and nor was it funded under the Nevada plan through the DSA payments. Pay as you go ends June 30th with an estimated 14.7 million remaining in that account to carry over into FY23. Pay as you go cannot be used for maintenance, only new construction and major renovations or replacements. Okay, so we're going to jump into some questions that were submitted ahead of time. One question was, how are playground improvements budgeted? And are there any funds allocated to playground updates in this budget? So each school receives a Part B maintenance budget to be used as that school deems necessary. Capital improvements aren't funded through the pupil state funding, per pupil state funding. Playgrounds have largely relied on grants and donations in the past, and we have a facilities Buildings and Sites Fund that can handle a limited number of projects a year, since those are just funded by rent and interest. What is the process for using private or public partnerships such as grants, fundraising, volunteering, and PTA funds to improve a playground? So private donations would initiate by a donor contacting the district and saying, we want to use X dollars for this specific purpose. We then have a gifts and donations fund where we track that donation to ensure it's used for that specific purpose. Fundraising can be done. Each school has student activity funds where they track and account for those donations. Volunteering and PTA would heavily rely on coordinating with the principal of that school, who would also coordinate with the district. And then there's also the incentive grants where the district matches a donation. You'll need to coordinate with the principals as they have a bunch of requests, and then they decide which one gets submit to the district for consideration. Okay, so this question is multi-level. We'll go through them. How many students were enrolled in the fiscal year 96-97? What are the number of staff employed at Central in those years, and how many of those were admin? And what's the number of school site administration in 96-97? So that's a ways back and our information is limited, but I was able to pull some of it. So per the FY 1997 audit, weighted enrollment in the funding formula was 10,057 students. And per that same audit, general fund site administration salaries and benefits were 7% of expenditures, including transfers out. And this would include principals and support staff and secretaries. And then this is kind of related to the top question, and it drops down to current FY22. So currently there are 9,968 students enrolled. Pre-COVID 2020 enrollment was 10,316. For central work location across various budget codes, there are approximately 31 full-time equivalents, and 5 of those are administration. So the 31 would include instructional, special services, and support, including like instructional people that don't have one specific site. If they work with multiple schools, they'll be coded as central. For the FY21 audit, general fund site administration salaries and benefits were 7% of expenditures, including transfers out. And this would still include principals, support staff, and secretaries. Current levels for site administration are estimated at 68 FTE full-time equivalent, managing 30 sites, including different departments. 31 secretaries and assistants, and 37 administration. We got a question. What is the procedure for petitioning the Elko County Commissioners for funding on behalf of work to be done at a school? Since pay-as-you-go failed, I was told that we have the option to request money from them. So assuming this work refers to capital improvement, the pay-as-you-go does end June 30th. The bond proposal also failed. So, the voters voted against capital funding. Requesting tax funds from the county would override what the voters decided. Additionally, the state has stated that there is no precedent of a county funding a school district project, and they're not even sure that's legal or allowed. Per pupil-centered funding plan does not fund capital improvements. However, it is intended for routine maintenance. And then we have the building and sites fund for smaller projects. At the moment, as of June 30, 2021, it had 774,000 in it, and it pulls in about 100,000 a year. So that'll be our funding for whatever projects we move forward with. Okay, another question is about the 4-day weeks. We do have some schools on 4-day weeks. Have they realized any cost savings, the 4-day week schools, in light of budgetary constraints, in addition to staff recruitment and retention challenges? Will the Board of Trustees consider implementing a 4-day school schedule for Elko and Spring Creek? 4-day schools don't really realize much savings. In payroll, there's no savings because the contract hours are the same, just in 4 days instead of 5. And I cannot comment on what the board will consider or will not. Has the Board of Trustees been presented with anything that would suggest that there would or would not be cost savings or other efficiencies associated with moving Elko and Spring Creek schools to a 4-day school week or alternate schedule? No, nothing related to a 4-day school week for Elko or Spring Creek has been presented to the board in relation to costs. Okay, so that was all the questions we received ahead of time. We'll open it up for any questions.
Hey, before we do questions, we probably skipped a step right at the very beginning, and that was to introduce who each of us up here are and maybe how we,
Yeah, I jumped into it.
why
Sorry.
we're qualified or able to answer some of these questions. So since I love to talk so much, I will introduce myself first. I'm CJ Anderson. I'm the superintendent of the school district, and your turn.
My name is Cassandra Stulke, and I'm the grant manager for the school district.
My name's Kayla Church, and I'm here to help moderate tonight's event. I'm the communications specialist.
Stephen Smith, Construction and Operations Manager.
I guess I didn't introduce myself either. I'm Julie Davis, the CFO.
Thanks for letting us do that. Yeah, at this point, if anyone else has any other questions, we'd be happy to entertain and answer and give some insight.
Julie,
Hi.
this is Susan. I just wondered, and I haven't looked at the website recently, are you going to put your presentation on the district site so we can take a look at it later as well?
Yeah, sure. I can upload it to our finance portal.
Okay, I think it would, people ask some good questions. I think it would be important to have that up there so that they don't necessarily have to go back and watch the video again. They can just go to the presentation because that also has some good information. So thank you for putting that together, and thank you to those of whoever the people were that asked those questions. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Has the district come up with what projects might be deferred as a result of losing pay-as-you-go or the bond?
I'd be happy to answer that one. Yeah, thanks for the question. So in short, like all of them is kind of the answer to that question. I mean, we had a list of future projects because every year as part of as part of going along with your tentative budget, there's a debt management plan that has to be submitted to the state by I think it's August 1st every year. And so an essential component of that is a 5-year capital improvement plan. So there has been one of those every year for forever. That's always been there. And all of the projects that have been done have always been listed on those plans. And so right now we are in a position where, because of our limited funds, so that plan is not done yet because it is not due yet. But we are in the process of, in fact, we have a meeting this week about it later to discuss those projects. But given the limited funds that are available to us and trying to be good stewards of those funds, we will be reviewing what immediate projects are absolutely necessary. And those will come down primarily to safety and compliance issues, and not a whole lot of ideal scenarios will be made with that money, but just really making sure we're meeting very basic but specific needs. That 5-year capital improvement plan will also include, so not for next year. Next year will be very much within what we have available. The subsequent years after that, so the other 4 on the 5, will reflect, if we had more capital funding, what we would spend it on and what sort of projects the district would like to move forward to be the best we can be. I think it was like a 2-part question. Is there a list? There will be one. And then if projects will be deferred, almost certainly, yes. The majority of the projects will be deferred by necessity. Yeah, of course.
Because I can't shut my big mouth.
No, you're great.
Okay, so I know that plan that goes to the state with the funding, or the capital improvements list, actually goes to the county commission, or not the county commission, but to the debt management arm of the county commission every year. So they also approve it. They're aware of what's on the list. They knew what was on the 5-year plan for the 5 campaigned against the bond. I just want to throw that out there. And several of them did say publicly, going along with the question that was asked, they said publicly, oh, don't worry about it. The county will take care of it. Has the county commission reached out to the school district to offer any portion of that money that they are now getting from the pay-as-you-go sunsetting?
No.
Thanks.
To be fair, I also have not reached out to them, but it's a direct answer to your question. The answer is no.
They offered it.
For the record, Lee Hoffman. And first thing I just want to say, thanks to the school district for putting this together. I know how hard it is as a former city councilman to get people engaged. You put this together, it doesn't look like the turnout's very great. And I think that's very regrettable, because at the end of the day, then people are going to come back and yell at you over various things. And if people were more informed, that might help. Anyway, thank you for doing this. I have a couple of quick questions. Neither one of them are going to be big components of your budget. The first one is, what are Suburbans for?
So we use those to transport just a few people instead of a bus. The Suburbans are much more fuel efficient and cheaper than using a bus for the amount of people it would fit in a Suburban. And since we've got schools all around the county, they travel between schools, and there's also travel. So if they use a district vehicle, they get reimbursed at a higher rate, or if it's cheaper to use a district vehicle and they use the fuel cards, but if they use a personal vehicle, then there's a lower mileage reimbursement they can use instead. So it's also for travel, for trainings, or between schools.
Okay. And the second question has to do with labor costs, I guess, if you will. When you budget this way, do you budget for 100% of your teachers, or at staff, or do you budget like as though you've only been able to fill 95% or some assumed amount of vacancy?
Well, I think prior we would budget as if we could fill them. So if we actually could fill them, we could legally fill them without going over budget. Going forward with our fund balance projected at 5%, we're going to have to reevaluate that.
With the budget or with the ending fund balance at 5%, as you've got it drafted there, is there a certain amount of vacancy you've got assumed in that, or is that based on 100%?
Well, that's based on filling not all of the 40 educational teacher positions we have.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a question. Morning or afternoon. We're from Spring Creek Elementary, and we have a playground that is over 30 years old, and we are trying to get it. I realize that there's no money for it, so we'd love to get private funding for it. Last night, the PTA actually approved or voted on donating like a certain amount of our last fundraiser towards it. And we're going to go to the association and see if we could use their labor and building stuff. So my question is, how would we go about getting that done through you guys and also getting more private funds?
So I think the fundraising you've got down, PTA does that all the time. So I think you'd coordinate with the principal and they'll coordinate with us, and we'll see what funds are available and what funds we might have. And then once we have like an amount, what we want to do and how much that'll be, it'll be easier to plan. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the more coordinated the effort is, the better off we're all going to be. Hopefully, I don't know if you mind me asking, have we emailed back and forth already about this? Okay.
I don't know actually directly, but I've been on some of the CCs. I'm Nina.
Okay. I was just going to say, can I know your name? Yes, Nina. Hi. Yeah. So I did hear just today about the success of your fundraiser recently. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yes.
And the Spring Creek teachers, I was just there like 2 hours ago. And,
nice.
and they
So
were
was I.
speaking very highly of the PTA there. So thank you for supporting our schools there. Yeah. So Julie kind of referenced a little earlier how we would go making sure those donations, because essentially that's what it would be, is a donation towards this project. Stephen and our department down there with construction and facilities, we would really want to make sure, because when you're starting to combine all these different elements, right? Because we're talking about private funds, we're talking about potentially public funds from the district, we're talking about private, like a vendor, a contractor, free labor from volunteers, right? So those are all things that we'd have to figure out, not only, which portions are coming from where, but also how we coordinate them properly, so that like essentially, is for an analogy like that, the five fingers are all working together as opposed to like hands pulling in different directions. So definitely we'd want to work through that. A lot of the like investigation of costs, of timelines, of statute and safety regulations and those things, we would not only ask for, but we would demand that we are in charge of making sure that we're in compliance with everything, and we are going to be the experts in what has to happen from that standpoint. But would love to incorporate the just the generosity of donors, as well as the people who are willing to donate their time. And if there are ways where we can potentially save money, for example, let's say the project's $150,000 and hey, maybe we can trim off 10 grand by having people shovel recycled shredded rubber, right? Like instead of having someone else do that, then we can look at things that can be supplemented by people's time and efforts, as opposed to paying someone else to do that. But yeah, just really making sure we're coordinated on that.
Which I would love to do that. And I would love to, be involved in it if I can. There is like this really great window of summer coming up. And I know you know, but our pea gravel
Heard of
is
it,
like,
yeah.
well, no, the summer
Just
thing too,
kidding.
but the pea gravel is like my number one concern. My daughter has gotten hurt numerous times. All my friends' kids have gotten hurt. We've had big injuries as well. And my son is going there next year and he is a little insane. So like, love to get that fixed.
Hoping to break the
sooner.
trend.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't like to hear about anyone getting hurt. And so it's definitely, concerns have been heard and we definitely want to work on it. As far as timelines go, I mean, we're getting into specific projects at this point, so maybe this conversation can be held at another time. But the summer does sound great, as long as that also sounds great for suppliers and also sounds great for contractors. And if that timeline works, then, great. But we'll have to TBD on that.
Yes, I totally understand.
Yep.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nina.
Angelica Loop, also with Spring Creek Elementary. So you just answered some of my questions, the TBD, but where would we fall in the budget? Like what, do you have already a category that playground improvement?
So each school gets a Part B budget, and that's allocated however the school sees fit. So I'd communicate that with the school. As for specific projects, we do what we're already doing. You've expressed your concerns. You've been in communication with Mr. Anderson, and
Yes, I
we've
have.
got the donations flowing, and we've got some set up to get, keep this moving. So
do we have a number? Does
number?
each school have a number for their playground improvement
Their
that's
playground-
budgeted every year?
So all maintenance is in their Part B budget. What they do with it is up to the school. It's up to them to say, okay, well, this needs done. This is a safety issue. This needs done. Or, something's going to need replaced soon. We don't tell the schools how to use their Part B. They can use it's for whatever is deemed necessary.
If I can jump in here, having been a school principal, there is no piece of that is called playground improvement, nor is there any way a school can just dedicate all of their B budget to one. That's what we all refer to, my B budget, right? And we can't, I as a principal can't just dedicate that to one project, because all throughout the year, the lawnmower needs parts. We need filters for the HVAC system. We need mop heads. Like, just the list is very lengthy, and I just thought of 3 things off the top of my head. But there are so many different supplies and that go into keeping a campus maintained. I guess what I want to reiterate about that, and Julie said it nicely, I'm going to be a little more blunt about it, is that is very specifically a maintenance budget and not a projects budget. So when it comes to having to do an overhaul of something like we're kind of talking about here, that is something that's not typically deemed to, is not something I like as a principal, I would not have dedicated a whole lot of money to that, because then what do we do for the other, every other day of the school year? Great, our playground looks nice, but what are we gonna do? We don't have mop buckets anymore because we don't have the funds for that, right? So it's all about how to adequately and like responsibly coordinate those funds for what we want and what we need.
I'm going to chime in just to give you there's some information. We were talking about the incentive grants, and Julie and I, in the past, it's been a $3,000 match. So if you contribute $3,000, we'll match up to $3,000. Going forward, based on, our deteriorating buildings or playgrounds or anything, we've decided that it'd be beneficial if we increase that match to $10,000. So in the fall, that application will come out. And I'm not sure if you have a teacher in mind or anybody that could apply for that. And like Julie said, it'll go to the principal, but that can potentially add $10,000 to your project as well.
Which doesn't fit great for wanting to get it done this summer, but it is, and I recognize that right away. It's the first thing I think of. something else important to keep in mind when it comes to those matching grant projects is there can only be one from the campus during that application period. And so so someone might feel like the playground is the biggest issue, and someone else might think a technology situation is the biggest issue, and someone else might think something else is the biggest issue. And so that's when principal might get 3 or 4 applications sent to them for screening, and they have to decide which is the most pressing need for a campus. And but I think you got a pretty good case, and I know a lot of people feel the same way. You're not the only one. So but yeah, definitely, again, I can't express enough the importance of making sure that the communication with the site administrator is where all that, like the communication from the parents should go through the site administrator so they can hear those needs of their school community. And then it's fine that I get it too. But in the end, just like if you came to me with hey, we need another 3rd grade teacher, I'd say, well, I'm going to need to hear that from the principal that they need a 3rd grade teacher, because they make decisions on personnel for their campuses. Principals also make decisions for budgets for their campuses. So it's just important that we're all kind of just keeping that line of communication the way it's supposed to go, and kind of having common interests and trying to work in the same direction.
I do have one more question. Can I
Sure.
go back up there?
It'd be helpful. I'll repeat it if you cannot. Okay, go ahead.
So on that line, but if we got private donations and those private donations wanted to go to a specific project.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. The private donation can say, we're going to give you $50,000 towards the improvement of Spring Creek Elementary Playground, and we would put it in a fund, and it would be very specifically labeled for the Spring Creek Elementary Playground,
Okay.
and it couldn't be used, not a penny of it, for anything else.
Okay, so so if we went out and tried to get that, the PTA doesn't necessarily count as that. Is that what I was understanding? Or the PTA does count as a private fund?
Any donations that aren't tax dollars would be counted as private funds. So
Okay.
if the PTA donated something, we'd ask, okay, what do you want it for?
Okay,
And it would be designated for that. I lost my thought. So we're not saying that, if you don't get the incentive grant, that we won't
Yep.
match anything. We
No,
don't
absolutely.
budget, we don't say this is for playgrounds. But as things come up, then we work with our budget. That's why the budget is an estimate. And as things come up, then we evaluate them.
okay. Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
okay.
so the private donations would still be.
Donated
designated.
funds can be spoken for specific purposes. Yes.
Volunteering and labor, where does that fall?
Well, technically, that's a revenue for us. So if we can just track the value, if people sign in and say, I did this on this day, we track that.
Okay,
And it'd be like a donated service for us.
okay. And I'm not trying to go around the process. I'm just,
Yeah.
I've got a
you're good.
passion
Yeah.
project, and I think other entities have a passion project too, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to add to that right now. So we've been in contact with a company that does playgrounds for a living. And right now, just like a basis to get rid of, I guess, the gravel that we have. So the east area is 12,500. The west area is 30,450. And that's if we do wood chips. If we go to the rubber surfacing, we're looking for the east at 124,000 and the west area at 340,000. And then if we use boarded timbers, east is 4,000 and west is 5,025. So,
And that's just removing the rock, or that's removing the rock and replacing?
so that would be just to replace the material that's there,
Not the labor.
not the labor.
just like-
But that is something, as CJ had pointed out, we could have that dropped off and then collectively as a team, we could move it with the maintenance department and also help from others.
Okay.
We could, let's, I'm gonna make a kind of an executive decision. We're gonna table all Spring Creek Elementary Playground conversations. And we'll continue to talk about that, not here and now, but yeah. No, you're good. You're good. Thank you for asking the questions. Hopefully you've left knowing that we're on it and we're thinking about it and we're willing to work with you.
Matt McCarty, Spring Creek, not necessarily specific to the elementary program or project. As more PTAs and other community-minded groups have in mind supporting the schools, is there a threshold of projects at which including in-kind donations at which a bid process is triggered?
So all the purchasing requirements still apply because we're a government entity.
Can you elaborate on what that dollar figure is for those that may not know?
$50,000 in purchasing requires bids.
Yes, Scott Gavorski for the record. Just a curiosity question. In budgeting for the Part A and Part B budgets, and realizing this is going to shift based on requirements for schools, but is there a rough average that the district is using for that budgeting, say 80 Part A, 20 Part B, 75, 25, so on and so forth?
We calculate them separately. The Part A is based on teacher and student counts. Part B takes some decision-making, a bigger school need more maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And something we've, I guess, Julie, you can correct me or elaborate, but it's usually that Part B budget has almost always historically been based on square footage, and we intend on also making the age of the building a factor in that as well, because a 30,000 square foot building that's 2 years old is going to require significantly less maintenance than a 30,000 square foot building that is 30 years old. So that is a factor. Was that considered this time around, or is that something we're doing moving forward? I know we were talking about that.
It can still be adjusted. Yeah.
Okay. So trying to make good decisions, not just throw a formula at it, but really think about what makes the most sense. It's 6:22, so we do have 8 more minutes for your questions if anyone is so inclined. Did you have like a closing thing you want to do, or is it 8 minutes for everybody? Anything to okay, all right.
I don't have anything else.
Okay.
The rest is just questions as people have them. Unless anyone has something to say. My presentation answered all the funding questions. Yeah, okay. All I had.
So just something to share with people. I actually meant to include it in the superintendent's report last night, and it slipped my mind because I had way too many other things that I spoke about, but just want to give a little, Julie very wonderfully, but quickly kind of passed through the 4.1 in net proceeds that were swept from us. I don't know if some of you caught that and knew exactly what that meant. And some of you were like, I don't know what a net proceed is. But what that meant was we thought, and I'm going to phrase this carefully because I don't want it to sound like we didn't know what we were doing, but we thought we had 4.1 million more dollars this year to work with than we did. And we are one of 18 school districts, 17 school districts, and then a charter authority who all thought the same thing. Everybody was blindsided by what happened with the net proceeds. We were informed, what, 3 weeks ago? 2 or 3 weeks recently, that they would be taking that money away, and they'd be taking in the form of withholding 1.2 to 1.3 in equal amounts of our allocation for the remaining months of this fiscal year. So we don't even have a way to fight it, a way to say like, whoa, hold on a second. Not immediately anyway. So they've already withheld 1.3 of that, and they'll do the same thing next month, and they'll do the same thing the next month. I have, along with other other superintendents from the other districts that were affected greatly. I know 4.1 sounds like a lot, and it is, but it's even more devastating to a few other districts who have much smaller budgets than us and who have had more withheld than was withheld from us. We have petitioned senators, assemblymen, NDE, governor's office, anyone we could think of. We had a meeting with them recently where we said, hey, if everybody didn't know this was happening, there's probably a problem with the communication. 27 million is a drop in the bucket for the state and their budget. We were planning on that happening in the future. We knew it would be happening, but we didn't know it would happen when it did. So we've asked for that money back. I'll let you make whatever guess you think about how they'll decide on that. But I just want you to know that we are not, and when I say we, that means me, Humble, Pershing, Churchill, Eureka, Story, Nye. We're not going quietly into the good night, so to speak, on that matter. We're doing whatever we can. We'll see what it yields, but that was a tough pill for us to swallow. Maybe after Lee does. Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, and it's just a curiosity question. I used to be a lot more informed about where net proceeds were and so on. Was that from a drop in an unanticipated drop in production? Or do you know?
No. Yeah. So, well, I'm happy to. Okay, I'll give it a shot. You fix me if I mess it up, Julie. But so this was part of the legislation when they determined that they were going to go with a new funding plan. Part of instead of the counties where those funds reside staying within the county, part of the pupil-centered funding plan is now all net proceeds go to one state funding account, and then that money is put into the allocation that goes out to all schools everywhere. So those 4.1 that Elko should have received this time around, we end up receiving like one something of it. The other 2 point whatever is part of the state funding plan and is distributed throughout the rest of the state. And I mean, well, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I have other comments.
So it's just basically based on the redo of the formula.
You got it. It's part of the formula that all those proceeds are getting swept. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
That was mainly my question. And then the other one, do you know if any other states were affected?
Counties or districts or state?
Is this like a federal thing?
Oh, the people-centered funding plan is a Nevada change. Yeah, because we had a plan before called the Nevada plan, which funded schools differently. And so the Nevada government essentially determined they wanted to fund its schools and with a different formula. And so part of that formula includes taking all the net proceeds of minerals from around the whole state and distributing them to everybody. Yep. So that is very specifically a Nevada thing.
Okay.
These are great questions. I'm glad I brought up a topic that could produce a few more. Did I do? Yeah, was that pretty? Was that right? All right, thank you.
Good.
Gold star. Got like 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah.
I can go over ClearGov real quick if there's no more questions. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So we've implemented a new site. I don't know if everybody's seen this. We have a transparency portal now. There's a link on our website, and then I have cards with a link on it too. It has links to our financial document portal, to our main ECSD website, Board of Trustee minutes and attachments, our YouTube channel for recorded meetings, the Nevada Department of Ed website that has test scores and a bunch of demographic information. There's state of Nevada expenditures that shows how much of the Nevada budget goes to education, and you can drill down to how much goes to each county. We had public notice here, as well as paper. We've got snapshots on student counts and employee counts, and they bring you to these tabs up front. And we loaded information back to 2017. And with a breakout by school, we have back to 2017 on our different revenue sources with explanations on the bottom of like why this changed, and that's due to the new funding formula. Same with expenses. You can drill down. We got a question online.
I want to read it too while I read it to the audience. The question online says, in 2022, ClearGov is showing an increase in spend of more than 23% versus 3-year average for support services. What drove the increase, and is there an opportunity to review and capture savings for reallocation?
So one thing to keep in mind is this is showing general fund. General funds expenses are going up because we're now transferring to other funds to support the expenses that used to be accounted for in other funds. So like class size reduction, that 6 million right there, that's now in the general fund that wasn't before. So the expenditures, the increase was expected.
And you'll find the same thing for, Julie kind of referenced it there, but lots of funds are going to look differently as the pupil-centered funding plan remains in place for years in a row. You'll start to see those things level out a little more, but there are certain funds that would be the inverse of that, right? Like last year, maybe it would be $850,000 in it and we're spent in it. And now there's zero from this year, right? Like just because allocations came in different ways and from different fund sources and accounts are named differently, that's going to happen, but you'll see a leveling out of that as the years go on.
And then after our year end and audit, we'll upload the 22 audited numbers onto ClearGov and we'll upload the 23 budget. So, and we're also working on adding a module, the checkbook module, that'll go over all our expenditures. And if I go to a year that's already closed, our expenditure breakdown. One thing to keep in mind too is this per student per year. It's not by school, it's per student. So the schools with the higher enrollment will have a higher number. It's not that we're spending more per student at that school, it's because they have more students. And lots of levels to analyze, so kind of got to click a lot. There we go. So, salaries won't have detail.
If I could just add one more note, Julie.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize enough that everyone here is willing to just help explain and walk people through processes. I've personally witnessed both Julie and Cassie, who deal primarily with our finances, demonstrate their willingness to just sit down with really anyone and have a conversation to help explain the ins and outs of our finances and rules behind different grants and allowances and things like that. So they are, we've had private, community members reach out with something, and Julie's response is often, you want to just come in and talk about it? Like it'd be easier because we want to make sure people are clear. And sometimes, as you know, a text or an email, like maybe things are interpreted differently or punctuation changes the way you read something. And so just to sit down with us, we're willing to have conversations about finances and beyond.
I think that's our time. If we don't have any more questions, I would just drill down in our supplies account, and it shows a lot of detail. There's a lot of information on ClearGov if you want to dig around in it. We have a public request email for questions, and that link is on ClearGov as well. I hope today was helpful to everybody.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who attended. We appreciate your involvement and caring about our schools. And yeah, like I said, reach out if you have any more questions. And have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.